Thank you so much for having me here. I'm really excited to share this work with you and talk about this issue, which is very important to me and I think very important to the world right now. So Susanna was wanting me to start from the beginning. I was actually born in Beirut, Lebanon. My father was in the Foreign Service. And so, you know, I was born August 1st, and actually in 1982, there was a very large bombing in Beirut, and I was 20 years old. So I definitely have some connection to the Middle East. And my first experience was actually with my father there. So yeah, my name is Hope Clark, and that is the beginning of who I am in this introduction to you. And so I, started actually a nonprofit organization called Wheelbarrow Productions after performing professionally in New York and doing some graduate work and doing some community work. I do identify as an artist activist. And Wheelbarrow Productions was a way for me to do projects in the world. And I did start internationally, first in Ethiopia. And at that time, I was able to travel in Israel, Palestine with my father, who was at the time the Churches for Middle East Peace Executive Director, actually. So it was a very exciting tour. But before that, even, I actually was working with the Freedom Theater in West Bank. And we were performing in the refugee camps there. So I had my first taste of tear gas at that time and got to experience what it was like to live in a refugee camp in Palestine. So that's the kind of before I went to Ramallah to do this, to create this piece called Cruelty. I had already had those experiences. And so let's see, just, Wheelbarrow Productions does have a little website that I created. So I'm going to put that in the chat for folks if you're interested to just see what that is. Right now, I work full time as a recidivism reduction project manager for the state's attorney's office in my small town. But this presentation today is part of Wheelbarrow Productions. This is what Wheelbarrow Productions does. So that's very lovely for me to be able to still do some of this work while I do other work as well. And I just want to say that, before I start to show this piece, this 5-minute long piece called Cruelty, that's really just a draft because it's kind of a piece that every time it's performed a little bit differently. I'm an improviser. I'm an improviser as a dancer. But it was a larger project, part of a project called Climate Recovery. So I do have like the series of videos related to that project called Climate Recovery. And I'm going to talk a little bit about how this piece, Cruelty, relates to the whole concept of climate recovery, being the climate crisis, as well as how we recover from addictions, and talking a little bit about what that is. So at this point, does anybody have any questions before we start to look at this 5-minute piece and discuss what it's about and this particular issue?
What's your dance training? I was trying to figure it out. It looks like you maybe had some ballet, some jazz, some modern dance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I started, as a little creative dancer as a little kid, but, and I was very hyperactive. So I was in ballet class, gymnastics class, as a young child. And then I started, modern dance about 14 years old, did some competitive gymnastics work, and then majored in dance in college, where I really learned improvisation and composition and, composing. And so then I danced professionally, though, with a really an acrobatic company called STREB, which is very contemporary. And I did that for 10 years. So, but my own work has always been very content-based and improvisational, which is practically the opposite of what I was doing professionally for somebody else. Yeah. So does that give you a little picture?
Wow. So I'm hearing from you that you traveled around a great deal. Is there anywhere that you sort of call home, or you've stayed in somewhere?
I was actually raised most of the time in DC, Washington, DC, from like 13-ish. So I was kind of lucky there, that I did have this really solid, public school American education. But after that, my father traveled, and before that, my father traveled. So that's why I was born in Beirut, lived in, Luxembourg and stuff. And then afterwards was able to travel into Africa and other places where my family was. So yeah, I've been very, very lucky on that level to have a lot of different experiences of different cultures. And really sort of broad, strange view of, economies and, poverty.
What brought you to Ramallah in particular?
Well, I was fascinated just being in Palestine. I mean, it was just astounding to me. I mean, and the whole, arriving in Israel, like my mother's Jewish, right? So I'm actually lineage, where I could go live in Israel if I wanted to, which was just astounding to me that I was going to go visit some Palestinian friends, but they couldn't really have the right to travel like I did. And even as I was coming into the country, there's a film now that was like made a little, maybe in the 90s, that sort of describes what it's like when you kind of arrive. I don't know if anybody else has arrived in Israel, what it's like the questions they asked you. And even when you leave, it's very scary. It's a kind of scary state in my opinion. But then just like hanging at first, my first experience really was with these actors, and they were, through acting, sharing with me what their lives were like, what it was like to live in a, territory that's sort of surrounded by this kind of police state, and you're unable to move. And it was just really moving. So, to go back and be able to stay in Ramallah, make a piece of my own. And I just happened to be around the corner from the Arafat Museum, which was astounding to me too, because there I could really at least see that perspective of history from the Palestinian perspective, and the documentation of, the Ottoman Empire, the British coming in, what it was like in those early years when they were trying to define, the land and power. And then to have this like very personal experience when I was sort of touching some really sensitive areas, right? Like, I'm like, why can't you just quit smoking? Isn't that just like, why can't you just be free from the occupation? Why can't you just do that?
Right, right.
So that's what I want to talk about today a little bit.
It's interesting because today I've been reading Primo Levi's book, because I know there was some very tenuous relationship between him and my late husband, who was classified as a Jew when he was born in Nazi Germany. So, but Primo Levi, he just talks about how nothing's ever black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. It's very hard to pin anyone down, their motives and all sorts of things and their reactions. So that was interesting, because I was reading that and watching your piece at the same time, and I'm thinking, yeah, okay. Very, very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, there's sort of complexities, blurry spaces. There's also a lot of clear analysis and some clarity too, which I think is important to articulate when you're looking at, systemic structures and history and stuff like that. So that's what I'd like to also sort of look at, if possible. Are we ready to watch the dance, you think? Okay, so I'm going to share screen. And I think we can start.
A vicious cycle of coping with cruelty. I wanted to make a piece about control. My intention was to understand better what controls us and what we have control over. The point was not to take advantage of how we can control other people, but how we may be more in control of ourselves if that is what we want. Addiction can be very powerful. It's used to control people. If you're never exposed to an addictive substance, you don't have to walk that balanced line of being so addicted to it, it controls your life. You get appreciation from other things that are not as unhealthfully addictive. When I meet people and cultures that seriously steer away from addictive substances, I admire them. I was able to let go of smoking when I equated it with a large global problem of human-caused global warming. I could justify my smoking with being a climate activist. It was an oxymoron. I innocently wondered if there could be a connection to the occupation and smoking, the Israeli occupation, I mean, and if looking into the roots of that addiction might be a way to free one from the feeling of being occupied. My Palestinian partner, Maher, decided to take on the word control by seeing how much he could control other people. Understandable. It is the occupation that controls people, and we want to feel like the controller of people. And what were the effects? His method of controlling me was to ignore me, to not give me any time. This made me feel depressed and a bit angry. What did I do? I sat with it and tried to figure out ways to appreciate my setting and transform my anger into kindness and respect. I worked to feel productive independently and eventually found other people to engage with. I started to work away from my original expectations. I also started smoking. My loneliness and insecurity took over, and it became okay to give myself this kind of crutch. It did not make me happy, but helped me deal with it. I found Maher's method cruel. But that is what the occupation is, isn't it? Cruel. And the powers that could change this cruelty ignore it. So it's a vicious cycle, coping with cruelty.
That's the third time I've watched it, and I like it more every time.
Oh, that's very nice. That's so sweet of you to say. Yeah, it's really interesting. Like, I have a few questions. Oh, okay. That I wanted to share at this point. Because I'm looking at addiction in and learned more about the differences between being controlled by a substance like fossil fuel or cigarettes and being controlled by another person or political power. And at one point I say, you know, smoking with the addiction of the occupation. I literally said that. So I want to say one thing is about the soundtrack, right? I made the soundtrack while I was there, and the dog sound is his dog, Maher's dog. So there's the soundtrack of the actual space that I'm in. And so that kind of, you know, it's interesting to think of, you know, what is oppression actually? And, you know, can you be, what is it to be psychologically addicted to trauma? Right? What's going on there? What's going on there? So that's kind of, you know, those are the questions that I'm sort of looking at. I mean, if oppression is to ignore the humanity of others, right? How do we psychologically handle that? What do we do? Whether you're being controlled by one person, a collective group, a personal substance use disorder, or a systemic structure. And this is what this work is attempting to look at, actually, the whole climate recovery project. And, you know, if you look kind of, you know, more into this particular piece, my experience was that it, you know, to be ignored made me really angry and really hurt, but it also caused self-harm, right? I went back to smoking. I was like, I don't care if I start, you know, killing myself again. This is going to be, I'm going to be okay, because emotionally I'm so fraught by being ignored, by being sort of just forgotten. And I think of that as the whole, you know, Palestinian cause, the whole culture almost. It's just being ignored. It's just. So then looking at like World War II, other world powers stepped in, right, to stop the killing. You look at South Africa, the world protested to transform the uncomfortable feelings that were being, to transform like the oppression from whites to blacks. And my question is, what must happen now to transform Israeli methods of what they think is establishing security? Because you have to be secure in order to give up an addiction. That's something I've also, you know,
yeah,
right? You know, if you're feeling really, really emotionally distraught and unsecure, it's very difficult. You reach towards the thing that's going to cover up the pain. But the way I, you know, let go of the addiction of just smoking was by listening and exploring the pain that was causing me to repeatedly numb out the uncomfortable feelings that were being covered up. So it took some kind of security to do that. I felt so secure, so I had the strength to listen to the pain. So the way, in some ways, I had to commit to the relationship with pain through a process of listening and being with whatever was bothering me. The pain started to peel away once I developed a relationship with it. Rather than covering it up, I became freed from its control. And I was wondering if freeing oneself from the control of an addiction could relate to freeing oneself from the occupation of Israel. But Israel is not willing to have a relationship with Palestine, really. They want to control Palestinians through ignoring the people and their needs, right? That's what oppression is. By controlling Palestinians' movement and Palestinians, they can't meet their needs. So Maher very successfully showed me what that feels like. Just simply ignoring me. It wasn't hard at all. I mean, That's a very powerful thing.
Yeah. Wow.
So I went to Ramallah to explore being freed from control, but I did not take into consideration security. I wondered if exploring the occupation could help free my friend from smoking, but it had the opposite effect. And he showed me why and how. Being ignored changed me, and I survived, but it didn't stop me from self-inflicting pain on myself. I witnessed the cruelty of the occupation in that way. So,
was this a conscious act on his part? I mean,
yes. He was. He's a really smart guy. Yeah. No, I mean, what happened? Huh?
So this was part of a performance piece, really, where he was explaining to you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Eventually he started talking to you and said, okay, I didn't mean it.
Well, I mean, eventually he said, look, you were asking me to quit smoking. How can you ask me to do that? And then I decided to do my own little piece here, right?
Right.
You came to Ramallah to work with me. This is how you're working with me. And this is the piece I did. And I was floored, right? Of course, it was amazing. And then for him also, to see how I dealt with it and the piece that I made. So, I mean, it's pretty nice outcome, right? He forced me to really understand their situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I've seen interviews of physicians who are at the front line and they're smoking, and someone says you're smoking, and they'll say, what are you talking about? I could be blown up any second. Why would I care? I'm not going to live long anyway, which is pretty horrendous, that you actually can have that attitude. I don't remember where that person was. It might have been Syria. I don't remember. But that attitude, yeah. Yeah,
I mean, and then, I also wanted to reference this article in the Shadow of the Holocaust, because I don't know if anybody had a chance to read Masha's article in the New York. It was published in the New Yorker. It really illustrates how today, like, say if I was getting paid to do this work and I was in a college and I was doing this workshop, I might lose my job here in the United States just for criticizing Israel. That would be anti-Semitic.
Yeah.
So, and that's one of the most astounding things right now for me. I've
been thinking about that a lot. Because, I'm 72. And when I was a kid, a teenager in Australia, we started sending people to Vietnam. And I was, my church, evangelical, low Anglican church, very evangelical. And we were all told that no, we had to go and fight Vietnam because otherwise we'll all be communist. There was this domino theory. Vietnam would fall, and then this country would fall, and then that part, and then we would all go to hell. Mm-hmm. So Billy Graham came from the United States to Australia to make sure that we were all Christians and all on board with the Vietnam War. So, there's very powerful things going on. And that's what's happening now, too, with Israel, because the United States, the United Kingdom are all supporting Israel. Although I'm seeing a sea change. Because I read the State Department press releases. So this last week, the Secretary of State is in the Middle East at the moment. And he's saying, well, wait a minute, Netanyahu is giving us all these things so that, we can write a blank check. And the State Department is saying, wait a minute, this isn't going to work. So I'm seeing there is some sort of change. 3 months of daily global protests have been going on. And I can see it starting to have a little tiny effect. And Yeah, because, I mean, we've been hearing about what's happening in Palestine. Oh, pretty much. I don't know. I guess and it's like, okay, well, that's the way it is. And but the protests now. I mean, the American Friends Service Committee, they brought people from Ramallah and from Israel in 2018. Sorry, from Gaza and Ramallah and Israel and all over the United States to talk about how they could make things better for Palestinians. So, I mean, American Friends Service Committee has been trying very hard. And, I mean, and then everything it's like a boil burst. I mean, or a volcanic explosion, which is just, it's just awful what's been happening. But, I don't know.
I mean, I would venture to say that is what Hamas was aiming for, right? To wake up the world and to say, and one of the interesting things to me is that there is one of the slides in the museum, and also Masha's article refers to this complete destruction of a certain village. 240, actually, she describes it. 240 people were killed. And this was done in the very early days of Israel by the far right party. And there was no violent, it was they just did it. Like that village didn't do anything to anybody or anything. And there's part of me that is just like Hamas using sort of that example to do what they did in order to wake up the world. And yeah, it's horrendous, absolutely horrendous.
Right. And the ones that were killed were generally the liberal people who were actually probably pro-Palestine. And that's the thing. Are you talking about Masha Gessen, the Russian?
That's the one who wrote the article. Yeah, she wrote the article.
Yeah, I've read quite a bit about her. Very interesting. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. Yeah. See, that's the thing. I mean, when you're hearing things from Israelis, it's somehow more acceptable or more believable or whatever it is. Because Palestinians have been talking about this for years. But this is the other thing too about being oppressed. People who are oppressed know they're oppressed, and they'll talk about it. And because they're oppressed, people don't listen. And that's what you're talking about with the silent treatment too. Mm. I mean, Palestinians have been talking about issues of being able to go places and losing their land and losing their homes. They've been talking about this for 75 years. Mm-hmm. And it's like, well, somehow that Hanan Ashawi, however, I'm not pronouncing her name properly. She's been talking about it for 30 years, and she's talking about it now too. So, I mean, everyone's, the oppressed have been talking about it for years and years, and just suddenly we're starting to listen now. And a lot of people are still not believing it. That's the other issue.
Well, there's this tremendous apparatus out there, right? Yeah. That's, what the, I want the article right in front of me. It's the International Alliance, right? That's created this definition of anti-Semitism that the United States has taken on, that Europe has taken on, and that is driving this sort of silencing of any type of criticism of Israel because it's associated with anti-Semitism, as if Israel and Jewish people are the same, and they are not. Right?
Yeah, well, it's the ADL, Anti-Defamation League. That's right. That's what they've been doing. They're saying if you're anti-Zionist, you're anti-Semitic. And then the other AIPAC, I know what you're talking about too. Yeah. It's interesting. My late husband was born to a Jewish woman in Nazi Germany in 1941. when the Nazis were there. So his birth was actually illegal because as the daughter of a Jew, she raised Catholic. As a daughter of a Jew, she lost her German citizenship. She was born in 1916. And that's what happened. If you had two parents that were Jewish or one parent that was Jewish and quarter Jewish, I mean, at the end of the war, they started killing people who were quarter Jewish. Mm-hmm. So here are these people who had never been in a synagogue in their lives, and they're told they're Jewish. Mm-hmm. That seems so evil on so many points, because it's not about religion. They didn't care about Jews. They just wanted to kill people. That's what I'm thinking. Because another thing with Nazi Germany, they were saying, well, I decide who's a Jew. And if you were being useful, you didn't have to be Jewish. Mm-hmm. I mean, the whole thing is just so awful. Well, but that's what I mean. It's not black and white. It's not simple.
Right. And I know, what I'd sort of like to continue to talk about is what is the psychological thing that is happening to engage present Jewish folk who identify with the trauma of the Holocaust and it's, there are many Jewish folk who think what's going on in Palestine is horrible and object to it. But they are also silenced because of the systemic structure that's being created by power structures, the Israel and other power structures. This memory culture is what Masha Gessen talks about in the Holocaust, the shadow of the Holocaust, which is and even our public school system teaches the Holocaust, but it doesn't teach Native American history and that history of the Europeans coming to the United States. So there's a lot going on there. And
silence.
Yeah. And all this idea of security, right? Well, everybody deserves to be secure, right? And this relationship to pain. How do you identify? How do you get to a place where you start to heal, right? In community. Right, Nathan? It's like, that's the conversation. When can Israel start to feel love and appreciation, and through that have security, through that have, a peaceful place, right? The whole structural apparatus of silencing and controlling. And they're even in that article that I'm going to just keep referring to that Masha wrote, is how the far right in Germany today are actually controlling the definition of anti-Semitism, so that it is actually relating to silencing Muslims. It's a very complex weird thing that is going on. Or, the head of Germany, or even, the head of Ukraine wanting so much to be a friend of Israel so that they are taken seriously by everybody, by the big powers, right? Yeah, it's really quite extraordinary. And we have to keep articulating it. We have to keep talking about it. We have to keep saying something. Yeah, Nathan.
We have low broadband, so I'm turning off my video to talk. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So right after my mother graduated college, she lived on a kibbutz, and my father traveled throughout the Middle East, never went to Israel. And his father and many people in my family just really have spent their lifetime trying to humanize both sides, but particularly Arabs, and particularly the Middle East. And I do that also. My wife and I took a long trip when we got married We were in 24 different countries doing service over a course of a year. Not all those countries very much time, but from Togo to Egypt to Cyprus, I only ever saw people wanted the same conditions. They wanted to have their family be safe. They wanted to have the basic conditions that our country used to promise as the foundation, health, safety, and welfare, which we don't give the rest of the world, and really is a promise, it's a social contract for whites in this country. But what I wanted to share is, thank you, Hope. It's really beautiful. And I'm powerfully moved. And I wanted to share something about New York City right now, because I'm part of a dismantling patriarchy group that is an outgrowth of our European Dissent meeting, DISSENT, where most of the people that I'm in the group with have Jewish history. And this week, a group that I'm part of called Quaker Activists on Facebook, we had someone who, posing as a American Jewish Zionist, put on the website that, we know you support the Palestinians, Quakers, for coming after you, with a very violent image. And it doesn't surprise me. I always remind Mossad that I know you're listening. I know the great earphones of the world want to hear this conversation. I want you to hear this conversation because we hold you accountable. We hold La CIA and all of these groups that want to destroy democracy and want to oppress the global South. And we know you're doing this. And we know that this trauma is shared. All of us Quakers, those of us who are Quakers, we came out of trauma. Hundreds of years of being run over by violent armies. All the populations where Quakers came from Wales to the borderlands of England and Scotland to East Anglia, all of those places came out of trauma, and we brought it here. And then we were traumatized when we enslaved people, when we stole people's land. So I don't see Israel as anything different than the apartheid state of the United States. And so I think that what you're sharing, Hope, is that Quakers like to talk about honesty and integrity. We like to say that we value, our first testimony is that of God and everyone. And when I heard last week the thousands of children who have had limbs taken off to save their lives without anesthesia, this is the United States that's culpable. And we're not doing anything about it. How many of us are outside the White House marching? I mean, I think that it's good. This is the last thing I'll say. I think it's good that this might start an anti-war movement again, which has been dead for 50 years, that we might realize that we've had a war, global war, since 2001.
Yeah.
But it pains me to be in these conversations, even though I think it's a very important, when I realize that it is so hard to get anyone to step out of their comfort zone of whiteness and give up their American Express card of whiteness that you can't leave home without in this global economy, with Israel calling the shots. It's just so sad. And I'm sorry, this is what I actually wanted to say. My friend, when I asked him, my Jewish social worker gifted mentor, about what to do about these types of statements, is he said, if I'm not in relationship with them, I won't talk to them. That we need to have Jews talking to Jews. Just the same way in this country, we need to have those of us that have been conditioned and racialized white or male, working on these things, because we let all of our neighbors off the hook and focus on something that we really don't have a relationship with. I mean, that's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Nathan.
Yeah.
We have I guess, what time is it? Yeah, we have like 15 minutes. Does anybody else have any thoughts or ideas? We have Ramon Cook here, Alec Unkovic. Talha.
Yeah.
Maybe we should ask you to introduce yourselves. Yeah.
Good. Don't be shy.
Hi, Hope. Uh, can I ask about the dance practice itself? And you were talking a bit about the words control and improv, and thinking about control. And I know that you said it changes every time. So could you talk a bit about how you kind of wove together thinking about control in terms of the systemic or cultural elements you're thinking about, and how that kind of arrived in your work and how you respond in that way? Does it make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I are you a dancer, improvisational dancer by chance? Or
I'm not a fan,
okay.
but I'm not. So
Okay. Yeah, I mean, improvisational dance is a very magical, spiritual, astounding experience for me. And I've always been baffled by it because I cannot control it. I cannot control it. I cannot control it. I can never control it. Some people will do improvisations and then they'll mimic it and copy it and make it a dance. But I've never had the patience for that because I'm too interested in the wildness of creating movement at the moment that is unexpected, that is just completely coming from, and this is why it's spiritual, because it is coming from, the energy forces of life. And that when you're in touch with that, it's completely, I mean, how do you control that? Right? So it's completely healing and mysterious and gorgeous. And I've had a lot of challenges with that because as a composer and a choreographer, it's terrifying not to be able to control like what you're making. But I've had to sort of just, I mean, maybe it could be why I never really focused on choreography as a job, right? I wasn't interested in selling it or trying to make money from it or, fundraising about it or anything like that, because it was just too related more to healing and spiritual life than, something I was going to make a business. But when you're talking about activism and art and political change and social change, there's a big realm there that the art world has expanded, from the Western perspective. I think it's always been there in other cultures, but in our, little modern dance ballet, perspective, it's changed. But, I'm a pretty old lady, right? I'm going to be like 60 this year. So it's taken a while to like actually, just have dance as a beautiful spiritual healing process. And this, piece that I made just like 4 years ago, or this experience I had that enabled me to delve into this work, is just a gift to me. It was just a gift. And, I hope that answers your question a little bit, because there's no control. There's no control, and we can't control other people, right? We can't control other people. Why would we even try?
Are you still dancing every day or?
In my kitchen, of course. Yeah, when I walk down the street. I mean, when I'm tired, we're always dancing.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hope, I was wondering if you could talk about the other segments of the Cruelty series and how the one you did related to the others.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, for a while, I was actually, I started as a volunteer with the Citizens Climate Lobby. And my first sort of piece was when I first started quitting smoking, I did a sort of a dance at a conference, right? And so I was just looking at the relationship of, quitting smoking and quitting fossil fuels, right? And how are we going to do that? How are we going to face the fact that we are this substance, this resource is, completely embedded in our world, and we need to face it and look at it and figure out how to live without it anymore. And what I loved about the experience was that it was so personal. I mean, I really literally felt that by quitting smoking. I felt there was a lot of parallel between those two things. And so it got me thinking about it. And I continued kind of engaging my local community, because with Wheelbarrow Productions, I had done a project in Ethiopia, I had done a project in Morocco, but I really hadn't done anything yet at home. So I started to think about how I actually went into like the recovery world to see if I could see relationships between, what it was like to the real recovery world of like substance use disorder, but also like fishermen and what they were dealing with, like rising, warming seas. And sort of, I started doing interviews with local folks and, wrote a play, just about, a woman who shared her life, did yoga at a recovery home, sort of connecting to nature and doing it outside to heal. So it really went in like a ton of different directions, Ramon. And I think I never really got anywhere. I just was like, okay, time to work, find another job. I mean, as far as really being a finished product, it was an exploration of a lot of different things. And I ended up working as, like at the state level to pass, climate legislation. And so that was, and I did a whole creative project outside in my local community to just understand the effects of climate change. This was in 2017 when Trump was in office, and you couldn't even say the word climate change in my community. I live in a Republican, Eastern Shore, Maryland. I couldn't even get the environmental organizations to recognize that it might be good to talk about climate change. So I've always just like pushing up against structures that are, not, kind of blind, maybe. Does that answer your question a little bit?
A little bit, yeah. So when you went to Ramallah, was your work supported by the climate recovery? I don't know if that was an actual organization.
Yeah, financially. Yeah. So I mean, I get little grants here and there, and I forever have just lived on nothing pretty much. And so it was, not hard at all to, get enough money to fly over there. And Maher just put me up, and so I didn't have to pay for anything while I was there really, other than my food. And I worked with a circus there. I'm always trying to, and had did earth dances with the circus. So there was a couple of different things that sort of branched out from the whole idea, because it's pretty complicated. How do you pull together this complex kind of relationship between addiction and climate change? Most people don't see any relationship at all, right? So if you've gotten any relationship between the two from this little talk, that would be good.
Yeah. Can you tell us, number one, how long you were in Ramallah, and number two, what it was like being for worship in Ramallah?
Oh, beautiful. Yeah. So I think it was 2 weeks that I was there, if I recall. And I was there during Easter. So if you look at my Facebook page, I have all these phenomenal pictures of Christian Palestinians in Ramallah who, what they do, by the way, if you don't know, they walk down to Jerusalem, and through a fence, they get the light from the Church of Christ, and then they walk it back up to Ramallah with all this fire, and then they spread the fire around, and you take your candles and everybody gets the fire, and then they carry the fire home. And it's just astounding. I mean, it's so beautiful. And so the Quaker meeting was lovely. I went, as much as I could. And then it was Easter, and they invited me to dinner, and, the principal of the school. So I could meet the staff, and, we ate lamb, and it was really lovely. Yeah. And actually through sitting at meeting there, I met, somebody who I met actually like when Maher was ignoring me and stuff, I was like, what am I going to do? Right. So he actually brought me around to the different refugee camps and, sort of became a friend and helped me kind of explore the country more. And so it was nice. Yeah.
You're a treasure and you have a wonderful first name.
Thank you, Susanna. Thank you so much.
And are you hopeful of the future?
Yeah. 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 I mean, I think, I can say a little bit about Quakerism right now and meeting and meditation and being with community. I think it's a very, very powerful way to connect. And I went to a Quaker high school, and that when my family was falling apart was incredibly important space to find. And I think having one's art lead, from that space of openness and clarity and, sort of self, just kind of not really selflessness, but just connection, the wisdom you get from being in meeting, from just sitting and listening, I think is really quite beautiful.